Case 1. Velma Barfield. The grandmother in pink pajamas. That's how Velma Barfield looked when she walked into North Carolina's execution chamber on November the 2nd, 1984. She was 52 years old, just 3 days past her birthday. Before her crime became known, people called her caring, nurturing, the woman who took care of the elderly. But underneath that grandmother's smile was something darker. Velma was born in 1932 in North Carolina. Abuse, poverty, alcohol. Her life was a mess from the start. Multiple marriages, all of them violent. But it was in the early 1970s when the real horror began. Velma discovered arsenic. She mixed it into food, into drinks, and fed it to people who trusted her. Elderly relatives, neighbors who depended on her care. Her victims thought she loved them. Instead, she was collecting life insurance checks and inheritances. At first, the deaths looked natural. Old people die, right? But when investigators started digging, they found the pattern. Toxicology reports showed arsenic in every victim's system. 6 people dead, all poisoned by the woman who smiled at them across the dinner table. During her trial, Velma tried to blame her addiction problems, her mental health. The jury didn't buy it. They saw the planning, the manipulation, the cold calculation behind every murder. Death penalty. Her last meal? Cheese doodles and Coca-Cola. Simple, almost innocent. Her final words asked for forgiveness, acknowledging the pain she had caused. Outside the prison, 300 protesters screamed for her life, while counter-protesters chanted, "Die! Die!" As the injection began, they asked her to count backward from 100. 199, 98. Her voice slurred. Then she started snoring. And then, silence. Velma Barfield became the first woman executed in the United States after the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Case 2. Carla Faye Tucker, a pickaxe. That's what Carla Faye Tucker used to kill 2 people in 1983. Not a gun, not a knife, a pickaxe. She was 23 years old, high on drugs, and filled with rage when she broke into a Houston apartment with an accomplice. What happened next shocked even hardened investigators. Born in 1959 in Houston, Carla had a childhood soaked in chaos, drugs, street life, violence. By her teenage years, she was deep into the counterculture scene, using hard drugs and living on the edge. That lifestyle led her straight to murder. On that night in 1983, Carla and her accomplice broke into a home during a burglary. Inside were Jerry Lindeen and Deborah Thornton. The plan was simple: rob and leave. But something went wrong. Carla picked up the pickaxe and swung it over and over. She later claimed she was in a drug-fueled rage, but witnesses said she seemed to enjoy it. The crime scene was horrific. Blood everywhere. 2 people dead. During her time on death row, something unexpected happened. Carla found God. She became a born-again Christian, participating in prison ministries, writing letters, expressing deep remorse. Her transformation became national news. People debated whether someone who had truly changed should still be executed. Her last meal was modest: a banana, a peach, and a garden salad with ranch dressing. Healthy choices that felt almost innocent. Her final words praised Jesus and reflected her newfound faith. Thousands petitioned for her life, including celebrities and religious leaders, but Texas wasn't swayed. On February 3, 1998, Carla Faye Tucker was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. She was the first woman executed in Texas since 1863. Her case sparked massive debates about redemption, forgiveness, and whether a changed person deserves a second chance. Her story remains one of the most controversial female executions in American history. Case 3. Betty Lou Beets. They found the first body under the wishing well. A 62-year-old great-grandmother stood accused of murder, and as police dug deeper into her neatly tended garden, they found something even more horrifying. A second husband buried under the patio. Betty Lou Beets, known as the Black Widow of Gun Barrel City, had turned her Texas trailer home into a graveyard. Born in 1937 in North Carolina, Betty Lou claimed she was sexually abused as a child and lost her hearing to measles at age 3. Life was hard from the start. She married young at 15, and by her own account, faced abuse in nearly every marriage. 5 husbands in total. But Betty Lou wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor who learned to fight back, and eventually she learned to kill. Her crime was calculated. In 1983, Betty Lou's 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, a retired Dallas firefighter, disappeared. She reported him missing and quickly filed for his $100,000 pension and life insurance. But investigators grew suspicious. When they searched her property in 1985, they found Jimmy Don's body wrapped in a sleeping bag at the bottom of the garden well, shot in the head. Then they found husband number 4, Doyle Wayne Barker, buried under the patio. Same gun, same execution-style killing. Betty Lou's own children testified against her, revealing she had planned the murders and enlisted their help to bury the bodies. At trial, she tried to claim her children were the real killers, but the jury didn't believe her. Death penalty. Despite pleas from domestic violence advocates, Governor George W. Bush refused to intervene. Betty Lou declined a last meal. She declined a final statement. As she lay strapped to the gurney, terrified and alone, she smiled at her attorney and pastor, coughed twice, and gasped. On February 24, 2000, Betty Lou Beets was executed by lethal injection. She was the second woman executed in Texas since the death penalty was reinstated. Case 4. Christina Marie Riggs. She wanted to die. From the moment Christina Marie Riggs was sentenced, she begged for the death penalty. No appeals, no clemency. She told the jury, "I want to die. I want to be with my babies." And on May 2nd, 2000, Arkansas gave her exactly what she wanted. Christina was born in 1971 in Oklahoma. Sexual abuse, trauma, addiction. By age 16, she was pregnant and gave her first child up for adoption, a decision that haunted her forever. She became a licensed practical nurse, had 2 more children, Justin, 5, and Shelby, 2, and tried to build a life. But Christina was drowning, financial troubles, a failed marriage, crushing depression. And then, one night in November 1997, she decided that death was the only way out. Christina's plan was chilling. She gave her children amitriptyline to sedate them. Then she injected Justin with potassium chloride, hoping to stop his heart. But the drug burned his veins, and he woke up screaming. Panicked, Christina smothered him with a pillow. Then she smothered little Shelby the same way. Afterward, she tried to kill herself, swallowing 28 pills and injecting herself with the same drug. She wanted to die with them. But her mother found her unconscious the next morning. At trial, psychiatrists testified about her severe depression, but the jury deliberated only 55 minutes before recommending death. Christina didn't fight it. She waived all appeals. When Governor Mike Huckabee reviewed her case, he declined to intervene. Christina declined a special last meal. As she was strapped to the gurney, it took 18 minutes to find a vein. Finally, they used one in her wrist. Her last words were heartbreaking. "There is no way words can express how sorry I am for for taking the lives of my babies. Now I can be with my babies as I always intended. I love you, my babies." Christina Marie Riggs was 28 years old. She was the first woman executed in Arkansas in over 150 years. Case 5. Wanda Jean Allen. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Those were the final words of Wanda Jean Allen, echoing the last words of Jesus Christ as she lay strapped to an Oklahoma execution gurney. Then she stuck her tongue out playfully at her attorney and smiled. Moments later, on January 11th, 2001, she became the first black woman executed in the United States in 47 years. Wanda Jean Allen was born in 1959 and had an IQ of just 69, bordering on intellectual disability. She had a troubled childhood marked by head injuries that affected her mental capacity. But none of that stopped Oklahoma from executing her. Her crime? Killing the woman she loved. Wanda met Gloria Jean Leathers in prison in the 1980s while both were serving time for previous violent crimes. When they were released, they moved in together. But their relationship was explosive and violent. On December 2nd, 1988, after a heated argument at their home, police escorted Gloria to collect her belongings. Just 15 minutes later, Wanda followed Gloria to the village police department, where Gloria had gone to file a complaint. In the parking lot, Wanda pulled out a gun and shot Gloria at point-blank range. Gloria died 4 days later. At trial, Wanda's defense attorney failed to present evidence of her mental retardation. The prosecution painted her as a remorseless killer who had already killed once before. She had served time for shooting her roommate in 1981. The jury sentenced her to death. For 12 years, Wanda sat on death row as appeals were exhausted. Her case became a national flashpoint. Amnesty International Reverend Jesse Jackson and countless activists protested her execution, citing her low IQ, her race, her sexuality. 27 protesters were arrested outside the governor's mansion. None of it mattered. Wanda didn't request a special last meal. As she died, she said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. That's it. Thank you." She was 41 years old. Case 6, Marilyn K. Plants. Marilyn K. Plants didn't pull the trigger. She didn't even swing the bat. But on May 1st, 2001, Oklahoma executed her anyway. Why? Because she planned it. She orchestrated it. And when her husband lay dying in a burning truck, she walked away without looking back. Marilyn was born in 1962 and lived what appeared to be a normal life in Oklahoma. She was married to Jim Plants, and they had 2 children. But behind closed doors, Marilyn was unhappy. She had fallen in love with Clifford Bryson, a 19-year-old high school boyfriend of her daughter's. Their affair became the catalyst for murder. In August 1988, Marilyn made a plan. She recruited Bryson and his friend William McKim to kill her husband so she could collect his life insurance and be with her lover. The plan was brutal. While Jim Plants slept, the 2 young men entered the home and beat him with a baseball bat. Then they drove him to a rural area, doused the truck with gasoline, and set it on fire with Jim still inside. The medical examiner later confirmed that Jim was alive when the fire started. At trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of Marilyn's role as the mastermind. She had provided the bat, coordinated the logistics, and promised to split the insurance money. Bryson and McKim testified against her in exchange for lighter sentences. Marilyn showed little remorse during the trial, and the jury sentenced her to death. Marilyn's execution drew less national attention than others, but it was significant nonetheless. She became the second woman executed in Oklahoma's history, and the 8th woman executed in the United States since 1976. Her last meal and final words were not widely documented. On May 1, 2001, Marilyn K. Plants was executed by lethal injection at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. She was 40 years old. Her case serves as a stark reminder that planning a murder, even without pulling the trigger, can lead to the ultimate punishment. Case 7. Lois Nadine Smith. Lois Nadine Smith was executed on December 4, 2001, for one of the most brutal murders in Oklahoma history. Her crime? Torturing and killing her son's ex-girlfriend in a fit of rage that shocked even seasoned investigators. Born in the Teurdic mid-20th century, Lois lived in Oklahoma and seemed like an ordinary woman. But on July 4, 1982, something snapped. Lois's son, Greg Smith, had recently broken up with his girlfriend, Cindy Bailey, a 21-year-old mother. Lois blamed Cindy for the breakup and became obsessed with revenge. Lois and Greg lured Cindy to their home under false pretenses. Once inside, the horror began. Lois forced Cindy to strip naked, then choked her with a rope. She burned Cindy with cigarettes and taunted her. Finally, Lois shot Cindy 9 times with a .22 caliber pistol, reloading twice to finish the job. The whole time, Lois's 9-year-old grandson was in the next room watching cartoons. Afterward, Lois and Greg wrapped Cindy's body in a blanket and dumped it in the countryside. Months later, hunters discovered the remains. The investigation led straight back to Lois. During questioning, she initially denied everything, but eventually the evidence was overwhelming. At trial, prosecutors highlighted the premeditated nature of the killing and the extreme cruelty Lois displayed. She had tortured Cindy for hours before ending her life. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to death. Greg Smith received a life sentence. Lois's last meal was reportedly barbecue ribs, onion rings, and a strawberry banana cake, a hearty Southern-style comfort meal. Her last words expressed remorse and reflected on her actions, though the details were limited. On December 4, 2001, Lois Nadine Smith was executed by lethal injection at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. She was the 9th woman executed in the United States since 1976. Her case remains a chilling example of how jealousy and rage can turn deadly. Case 8. Aileen Wuornos. I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie Big Mothership and all. I'll be back. Those were the bizarre final words of Aileen Wuornos, America's most infamous female serial killer, before she was executed on October 9, 2002. Born in 1956 in Michigan, Aileen's childhood was a nightmare. Sexual abuse, neglect, violence. By age 13, she was pregnant after being raped. She gave the baby up for adoption and hit the streets, surviving as a sex worker. Trauma followed trauma, and by 1989, Aileen had become a killer. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen shot and killed 7 men in Florida. She claimed they were all Johns who tried to rape her, that every killing was self-defense. But investigators saw a pattern. The men were shot at point-blank range with the same .22 caliber pistol. Their belongings were stolen. Ballistic evidence linked Aileen to all 7 murders. When police arrested Aileen in 1991, she confessed on tape, initially maintaining her self-defense story. But prosecutors argued the killings were cold, calculated, and motivated by robbery. Aileen was convicted and sentenced to death for each murder, 7 death sentences in total. Her case became a media sensation. Documentaries, movies, books. Everyone wanted to understand the mind of a woman who killed 7 men. Mental health experts debated whether her severe trauma and possible mental illness should have spared her from execution. But Florida didn't care. Aileen declined a traditional last meal. She only drank a cup of coffee. Her final words were strange and rambling, filled with religious references and conspiracy theories. She seemed detached from reality, which only fueled debates about her mental state. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She was 46 years old. Her story remains one of the most analyzed and debated cases in true crime history, a tragic intersection of trauma, violence, and the death penalty. Case 9. Frances Elaine Newton. Frances Elaine Newton spent 18 years on death row maintaining her innocence. She claimed she didn't kill her husband and 2 young children. But on September 14, 2005, Texas executed her anyway, making her the 10th woman executed in the United States since 1976. Frances was born in 1965 in Texas and lived what appeared to be a normal life. She was married to Adrian Newton, and they had 2 children, Alton 7 and Farah, 21 months old. But on April 7, 1987, everything changed. Frances returned home to find all 3 of them shot to death in their Houston apartment. From the start, investigators suspected Frances. The crime scene seemed staged. She had taken out life insurance policies on her family just weeks before the murders. Gunpowder residue was found on her hands. And most damning, the murder weapon, a .25 caliber pistol, was later found in a bag belonging to Frances's best friend, hidden at her request. At trial, prosecutors argued that Frances killed her family for the $100,000 in life insurance money. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Frances's defense team claimed she was being framed, that the real killer was never found. But the jury didn't buy it. They sentenced her to death. For nearly 2 decades, Frances fought her conviction. New forensic evidence raised questions about the gunpowder residue. Advocates claimed she was innocent, that Texas was about to execute a woman who didn't commit the crime. Protests erupted, celebrities spoke out. But Texas Governor Rick Perry denied clemency. Frances's last meal was not widely documented. Her final words maintained her innocence, a last plea that fell on deaf ears. On September 14, 2005, Frances Elaine Newton was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She was 40 years old. To this day, questions linger about her guilt. Was Frances a cold-blooded killer who murdered her family for money? Or was she an innocent woman executed by a system that failed her? We may never know the truth. Case 10. Teresa Lewis. Teresa Lewis was called the mastermind. On September 23, 2010, Virginia executed her for orchestrating the murders of her husband and stepson. But there was a problem. Teresa had an IQ of just 72, bordering on intellectual disability. Critics argued that executing her was cruel, that the real killers, the men who pulled the trigger, deserved death more than she did. Virginia disagreed. Teresa was born in 1969 in Virginia. She had a troubled life, marked by instability and poor decision-making. In 2000, she met Julian Lewis, a man 20 years her senior, and they married. Julian had a sizable life insurance policy, and Teresa quickly became obsessed with it. Teresa began an affair with Matthew Schallenberger, a 22-year-old man she met at a Walmart. She manipulated him and his friend Rodney Fuller into killing her husband and stepson so she could collect the insurance money. On October 30th, 2002, the 2 men entered the Lewis home and shot Julian and his son CJ while they slept. Both died from their wounds. Teresa's role was undeniable. She had left the door unlocked. She had promised the men a share of the $250,000 insurance payout, and after the murders, she withdrew money and bought new clothes, seemingly unbothered by the deaths. When police questioned her, she confessed almost immediately, implicating Schallenberger and Fuller. At trial, Schallenberger and Fuller received life sentences after cooperating with prosecutors. But Teresa, labeled the mastermind, was sentenced to death. Advocates argued this was unjust. Her low IQ made her easily manipulated and the shooters should face harsher punishment. But Virginia stood firm. Teresa's last meal was fried chicken, peas, Dr. Pepper, and apple pie. A simple, comforting meal. Her last words expressed love for her family and remorse for her actions. On September 23, 2010, Teresa Lewis was executed by lethal injection at the Greensville Correctional Center in Virginia. She was 41 years old, and her execution sparked national debates about intellectual disability and the death penalty. Case 11. Kimberly McCarthy. Kimberly McCarthy was a former nursing student turned brutal killer. On June 26, 2013, Texas executed her for the murder of her elderly neighbor. She became the 500th person executed in Texas since the death penalty was reinstated, a grim milestone. Kimberly was born in 1961 and had once aspired to be a nurse. But somewhere along the way, her life spiraled into drugs and violence. By the 1990s, she was deep into crack cocaine addiction, and her desperation led to murder. On July 21, 1997, Kimberly knocked on the door of her 71-year-old neighbor, Dorothy Booth, in Lancaster, Texas. Dorothy, a retired college psychology professor, let Kimberly inside. What happened next was brutal. Kimberly beat Dorothy with a meat tenderizer, stabbed her 5 times, and severed her finger to steal her diamond ring. Then she ransacked the house, stealing Dorothy's Mercedes-Benz and other valuables. The evidence against Kimberly was overwhelming. Her fingerprints were found in Dorothy's home. Witnesses saw her driving the stolen car. And most damning, she pawned Dorothy's ring the same day. At trial, prosecutors painted Kimberly as a cold-blooded killer driven by greed and addiction. She was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Kimberly's case drew attention for another reason. She was the first Black woman executed in the United States since 2005. Civil rights groups protested, arguing that her race played a role in her sentence. But Texas proceeded with the execution. Kimberly's last meal was not publicly documented, nor were her final words widely reported. On June 26, 2013, she was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She was 52 years old. Her execution as the 500th in Texas highlighted the state's aggressive use of capital punishment and reignited debates about race, justice, and the death penalty in America. Case 12. Suzanne Basso. Suzanne Basso was called a monster. On February 5, 2014, Texas executed her for one of the most horrific torture murders in state history. Her victim was a mentally disabled man who trusted her completely. What she did to him shocked even the most hardened prosecutors. Suzanne was born in 1954 and had a long history of manipulation and violence. By the 1990s, she had orchestrated a twisted con. She lured Louis Buddy Musso, a 59-year-old mentally disabled man from New Jersey to Texas with promises of love and marriage. Buddy, who had the mental capacity of an 8-year-old, believed every word. But Suzanne had no intention of marrying Buddy. Instead, she planned to collect his life insurance. Along with 5 accomplices, Suzanne subjected Buddy to weeks of torture. They beat him with belts, baseball bats, and boards. They burned him with cigarettes. They kicked him until his body was covered in bruises. On August 25, 1998, Buddy died from his injuries. His body was dumped on the side of a road. When police found Buddy's body, they were horrified. He had suffered over 100 injuries. His death was slow and agonizing. The investigation quickly led to Suzanne and her accomplices. All were arrested and charged with capital murder. At trial, prosecutors described Suzanne as the ringleader, the one who orchestrated every moment of Buddy's suffering. Her accomplices received life sentences, but Suzanne was sentenced to death. She showed no remorse. Suzanne's last meal was not widely documented, nor were her final words. On February 5, 2014, Suzanne Basso was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She was 59 years old. Her case remains a chilling reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the importance of protecting society's most vulnerable members. Case 13. Lisa Ann Coleman. Lisa Ann Coleman starved a child to death. On September 17, 2014, Texas executed her for the torture and murder of her girlfriend's 9-year-old son, Devontae Williams. The details of the case were so horrific that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend the cruelty. Lisa was born in 1975 and lived in Arlington, Texas. She was in a relationship with Marcella Williams, who had a son, Devontae. The boy should have been safe in their care. Instead, he became the victim of unimaginable abuse. For months, Lisa and Marcella systematically tortured Devontae. They tied him up with ligatures so tight that they left permanent scars. They withheld food, causing him to waste away to just 35 pounds, half the weight he should have been. They beat him, they burned him. And on July 26, 2004, Devontae died from malnutrition, pneumonia, and over 250 scars covering his body. When authorities found Devontae's body, they were shocked. The medical examiner described the injuries as some of the worst he had ever seen. The boy had been systematically tortured over a long period. Lisa and Marcella were both arrested and charged with capital murder. At trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of the abuse. Devontae's siblings testified about the horrific conditions he endured. The jury found both women guilty. Marcella received a life sentence, but Lisa was sentenced to death because the jury determined she was the primary aggressor. Lisa's last meal was not widely documented, nor were her final words. On September 17, 2014, Lisa Ann Coleman was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She was 38 years old. Her execution was the 15th woman executed in the United States since 1976. The case remains one of the most disturbing child abuse cases in Texas history, a heartbreaking reminder of the vulnerability of children and the evil some people are capable of. Case 14. Kelly Renee Gissendaner. Kelly Renee Gissendaner didn't kill her husband herself. She didn't even hold the knife. But on September 30th, 2015, Georgia executed her anyway, making her the first woman executed in that state in 70 years. Why? Because she was the mastermind. She planned it. She manipulated her lover into doing it. And when Doug Gissendaner's body was found, Kelly tried to play the grieving widow. Kelly was born in 1968 in Georgia. She married Doug Gissendaner, and they had 3 children together. But the marriage was troubled. Kelly began an affair with Gregory Owen, and the affair turned deadly. Kelly convinced Owen that the only way they could be together was if Doug was dead. On February 7th, 1997, Kelly lured Doug to a remote area under the pretense of reconciling, but Owen was waiting. He forced Doug to his knees and stabbed him multiple times, killing him. Afterward, Kelly and Owen set Doug's car on fire to cover their tracks. But the plan unraveled quickly. Owen confessed and testified against Kelly in exchange for a life sentence. At trial, prosecutors painted Kelly as a manipulator who used Owen's love for her to commit murder. The jury agreed and sentenced her to death. But Kelly's time on death row was different. She underwent a profound religious transformation. She became a counselor to other inmates, participated in Bible studies, and expressed deep remorse. Even Doug's family forgave her and pleaded for clemency. Despite widespread support from religious leaders, human rights groups, and even the Pope, Georgia refused to stop the execution. Kelly's last meal was 2 Burger King Whoppers, 2 large orders of fries, cornbread, lemonade, salad, and cherry vanilla ice cream. Her final words were poignant. She sang Amazing Grace and expressed her faith and love for her family. On September 30th, 2015, Kelly Renee Gissendaner was executed by lethal injection at Georgia Diagnostic Prison. She was 47 years old. Case 15. Lisa Montgomery. Lisa Montgomery was the first woman executed by the federal government in nearly 70 years. On January 13th, 2021, she was put to death for one of the most disturbing crimes imaginable: strangling a pregnant woman and cutting her baby from her womb. Lisa was born in 1968 in Kansas and endured horrific abuse throughout her childhood. She was sexually assaulted by her stepfather, trafficked by her mother, and suffered severe trauma that left lasting psychological scars. By adulthood, Lisa was mentally unstable and desperate for a child. In December 2004, Lisa met Bobby Joe Stinnett online through a dog breeding website. Bobby Joe was 8 months pregnant. Lisa drove to Bobby Joe's home in Missouri, strangled her with a rope, and then used a kitchen knife to cut the baby from her womb. Lisa took the baby and tried to pass it off as her own, but investigators quickly tracked her down. The baby was recovered alive, but Bobby Joe was dead. At trial, Lisa's defense team presented extensive evidence of her severe mental illness and the horrific abuse she suffered. But prosecutors argued she knew what she was doing and planned the crime carefully. She was convicted of kidnapping, resulting in death and sentenced to death. Lisa spent 16 years on federal death row. Her case drew national attention, with mental health experts, advocates, and even prosecutors from her trial calling for clemency. They argued that executing a woman with such severe mental illness was cruel, but the Trump administration pushed forward with her execution. Lisa's last meal was not publicly documented. She reportedly had no final words. On January 13, 2021, Lisa Montgomery was executed by lethal injection at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. She was 52 years old. Her execution remains deeply controversial, raising questions about mental illness, trauma, and the death penalty. Case 16. Amber McLaughlin. Amber McLaughlin made history on January 3, 2023. She became the first openly transgender woman executed in the United States. But her execution wasn't about her gender identity, it was about murder. In 2003, Amber killed her former girlfriend in a brutal, premeditated attack that left a community in shock. Amber was born in 1960 and assigned male at birth. She transitioned later in life and lived as a woman. She had a history of violent behavior, and in 2003, she was obsessed with her ex-girlfriend, Beverly Gwinther. When Beverly ended the relationship, Amber couldn't let go. On November 20th, 2003, Amber stalked Beverly as she left work in St. Louis. She followed Beverly to a dark street, attacked her, and stabbed her repeatedly. Beverly's body was found near the Mississippi River, hidden in tall grass. The brutality of the attack shocked investigators. At trial, prosecutors presented evidence of Amber's stalking behavior and the premeditated nature of the killing. She had followed Beverly multiple times, refused to accept the breakup, and planned the attack. Amber's defense team argued about her mental health struggles and traumatic childhood, but the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to death. During her time on death row, Amber's case drew national and international attention because of her gender identity. Advocacy groups called for clemency, arguing that her mental health issues and history of trauma should spare her from execution. Missouri Governor Mike Parson denied the request. Amber's last meal was a cheeseburger, fries, a strawberry milkshake, and peanut M&Ms, comfort food that felt almost ordinary. Her final words were brief but sincere. She apologized for her actions and expressed remorse. On January 3, 2023, Amber McLaughlin was executed by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Missouri. She was 49 years old. Her execution sparked debates about gender identity, capital punishment, and justice. You've just seen the last meals and final words of 16 executed women. But there's a 17th case we didn't cover, one so controversial, so shocking, that it deserves its own video. Subscribe and hit that bell icon because this story will drop next and you won't believe how it ends.